Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Listen Up Accord. My name is Pierre Cooke. I stand in the Barbados National Youth Parliament as the Prime Minister, and I'm also a Youth Program Assistant at the Ministry of Youth, Sports and Community Empowerment. I'm really excited to bring to you this week's episode where we will be discussing choices. Now, just last week, we had a discussion about vaccinations, choices around vaccinations, whether you should get it, whether you should not get it. And this week, we will be continuing that discussion, but in a different space, youth, violence, and choices. Is it my choice? Is it their choice? What is leading our young people down the wrong or right road? Now, we also have opportunities for you, our audience, to win prizes. Listening to the presentations, we're going to be looking for the most engaging comment on our Facebook page, so you can follow us or check us out at Division of Youth Affairs or at CBC's Facebook page. We are offering prizes at the Amigos in the Gap, Timeout in the Gap, where you can have an opportunity to win a dinner for two. They have quite an interesting menu, so get on board to our Facebook pages at Division of Youth Affairs or CBC on Facebook to get your chance to win a prize. Now, we have quite an interesting panel today, and I'm really happy to have them on board with us for this discussion. So we have Shawn Clarke, who is the founding member and Chief Executive Officer of Supreme Counselling for Personal Development. We also have Roland Maloney, who is a registered counseling psychologist and a member of the Barbados Society of Psychology. We have Shernell Clarke, who is the guidance counselor at the Darrell Jordan School, and Shem White, who is an 18-year-old student of the Allen School and current president of the Students' Council. So just before we get into the discussion, we're going to go to a short break, and then we'll come back and jump right into it.
These guns around the whole entire world. It is just very foolish death, you see? The person who has a gun who is shooting, they could be shooting an enemy and accidentally shoot an innocent person. And they didn't see, so they don't care. So it needs to stop immediately. I would rather see people just living peacefully.
Powerful message from that young man. And that's the reality of today. Sometimes the children must lead us, and we see that all over. When the action and activity started around climate change, it was young Greta Thunberg who started that conversation in a major way. And we're in a situation today where young people are pushing us and pulling us in the right, sometimes wrong direction. Today we're going to talk about those choices, and I'm happy to have my panel here with me so I can have some assistance in going through this conversation. Now, first of all, what is the connection? What do you think the connection is between youth and violence? Where do you think we started with this? More often than not, we understand that it takes a village to raise the child, but we're in a situation where our children are deviant. Some of them are astray. Where do you think that started? Shawn, I'm going to start with you for a first comment.
Good evening to you, Pierre. Thank you so much for having me. I really think that it started from the time we became almost private within our households, where our guard walls blocked us out from our neighbors, where we've moved away from the extended family. We've moved away from communities looking after children. We've moved away from community activities. We have seen the closure of the majority of community centers on the island, where young people are no longer congregating and doing positive things together. We have moved to a society now where it is all about me, where parents are saying to their children, it's not your business, so stay out of it. So I think from the time that we've made that change, from the time we've moved away from the extended family, from the time we've moved away from community spirit and from community life, from the time we became selfish without our own rights, we have seen this massive increase in violence amongst young people.
Thanks very much for that comment, Shawn. And I noticed very much that you mentioned that we've moved away from congregating and getting together in groups and supporting and helping our young people as a community. And one of the things that caused us to move away from that community approach was obviously the COVID-19 pandemic. We saw children thrust from being in a very social environment, in schools, outside playing, they might hang out over the weekend, to being in a situation where you're basically at home. You're not able to get out or have an escape at school. You're not able to have an escape on the weekends. And now you're locked away. And I think it's interesting to consider what the impact has been on our students. Shem, I want to understand from you, when this whole thing started, when we moved from a place of in-person classes and that socialization to you being at home, how did that necessarily affect you? Did you have more time on your hand? Were you unsure what to do? How did that affect you during that time?
Good afternoon, good evening to the entire Barbados, to the panel, to you here.
Good evening.
I think that the moving away from the in-person class to the home environment or into the online environment would have impacted not only me but students significantly in terms of social development. And today we're speaking, as a matter of fact, on choice and more importantly on violence. And I think that this moving away from in-person class to the online environment would impact students because they are more into their communities. And one thing that I've learned about making choices, and one thing I've learned about making choices and about even violence is the community or the environment that you come in. And so on this topic that we are on this today, I think that one of the major things that we're going to look at is the environment of making choice. And one of those things that would impact the children or students in making choice is exactly what you're asking, is the fact of moving away from the in-person classes or in-person environment or physical environment onto the online environment, if I answer your question correctly.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Shem. And just because you've made that point about, moving away from school and you're at home and there's a different situation, different dynamic, people tend to say that the devil finds work for idle hands. And Shernell, I would like to hear from you. Just moving away from a situation where you had immediate access to your students, you could offer immediate support to them in school if there were difficult situations that they could come to you to talk about. If maybe they were having violent thoughts, they could come to talk to you and have that moment to think and reflect. How do you think moving away from having that immediate support has affected students?
Again, it has impacted them significantly because let me just say that they feel more connected in terms of speaking to you physically. I feel that it is more of a psychological impact where that they speak to presidents or even the guidance counselors.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I get your point, Shem. Thank you. And I want Shernell as well to comment on this in terms of the psychological impacts in students being moved away from that immediate physical access. And just to describe for us, we're going to have a chat later on about what did mental support look like during the time children were at home. But what do you think moving away from that immediate support, how do you think that's affected students and children and their choices?
All right, good evening, Pierre. Good evening to the panel, and good evening to those who are watching. Okay, so the fact that the students were able to hide behind the technology, hide behind the computer, hide behind the phone or whatever device that they're using, it kind of made it a little less personal, more impersonal of sorts, where the students, they did not necessarily want to talk over the phone, because when they were on the phone, that would mean that there's somebody in the background listening. That somebody is in the background listening. And children tend to not want to talk sometimes when adults are around, but they would want it to be just you and them as the guidance counselor. So not having that face-to-face option, I think that it did have an impact on the children in that they were not comfortable speaking, especially when there are persons around. And so if they're going to have those violent thoughts, they may not feel comfortable talking to somebody within their household. They may go and confide in somebody who might encourage them in acting upon those violent thoughts. But I want to say that it goes back to conflict resolution skills, because if we do not teach our children proper conflict resolution skills, and I mean it starts from in the home, because we do a lot of it at school, but if what we are teaching them at school doesn't line up with what they are being told at home, with mommy telling them or daddy telling them, if anybody hits you, hit them back, before you even ask a question, before you even think about what are the consequences of reacting with violence, I think that is where we have the whole issue of a society or of youngsters who are a little more violent than before, because they need that constant reminder of the skills to exercise for conflict resolution.
Yeah, that's a brilliant point, and I think it's important that we add that to the conversation, helping young persons to understand and develop those skills of conflict resolution. Everything shouldn't be you go and pick up a big rock, or I mean, in today's day, get some other type of artillery, but helping young persons to develop those skills. But I think that one of the things I want us to discuss is, how do we help persons to understand, young persons to understand, they have the power of choice. You know, CBC did an ad just a couple years ago. I remember seeing it a lot when I was at school. I have the power of choice. I can make the decision to do this or not to do this. And Roland, I know that you have done some work and you're a consultant with the Ministry of Education in terms of primary school counseling. At that juvenile level, at that very tender age, what are your experiences in terms of how children approach violent or difficult situations? Have you seen, or from your experience, do you think enough is being taught at home? Shawn mentioned it earlier, the community is the one who teaches children the skills. Do you think enough is being done at home to help our children understand how to resolve minor and major conflicts? I'm not getting your audio, Shawn. Still not hearing you, but while we take a moment for you to sort out the audio there, Shawn, just on the same point, because I know you've had some experience dealing with young persons at some of our schools across the region or across the country, and one of the things that I've experienced, that I know of, is that without finding the community at home, young persons create that community for themselves. They might find the community in the block, they might find the community at church, they might find the community elsewhere. What value do you think there is in helping to navigate and steer young persons towards the appropriate communities? And then the other flip side of that, do you think there's any value in block culture? Young persons being exposed to block culture, a community gathering in the community?
Well, let me start with the whole idea of block culture, because usually when we hear of block culture in Barbados, we think of something negative. We think that it's a place where young people congregate only to get involved in negative activity. I somehow, I don't share that same view in all instances. The block is a place of belonging. And sometimes if you take the opportunity to speak to young people on the block, you realize how intelligent they are. Not only intelligent in terms of street smarts, but intelligent in terms of academics. So that we need now to use the block. We need to use that. If that is where our young people are at, then we have to go there to teach our young people about choices, and also to say to them that choice, along with choices comes responsibility. You have responsibility to self, you have responsibility to family, you have responsibility to country. We must also put ourselves in a position, as Ms. Clarke started to say, we cannot wait until a child reaches teenage years then to try to learn this child to make appropriate decisions. It has to be something that is embedded in that child from a very, very young age. What about critical thinking? When we talk about choices, we talk about making a decision between two or more possibilities. So are we from a very young age teaching our children about critical thinking? Are we teaching them, about making the appropriate decision? Are we teaching them about standing on their own and being firm in the decision that they have made? So I think these are some of the things that we have to bring into the conversation when we're talking about choices and young people having the power of choice. Yes, you have the power of choice, but along with your choice comes consequences, and you must also be willing and ready to face the consequences of the choices that you make, whether they're negative or positive choices.
Thank you very much, Shawn. And I hear you loud and clear. You make a choice, you have to deal with the consequences of it. And I think someone, a 13-year-old, 14-year-old, 11-year-old might be able to appreciate that. But how do we tell a 6-year-old, 7-year-old that, you make a choice, you have to deal with the consequences? How do we teach that? Are we teaching our children at that age or that stage those important life lessons? And I'm going to go back to you again, Roland, to tell me what has your experience has been like in terms of dealing with children at those tender stages and the psychology of children at those tender stages. Do you find, or do you think that we're doing enough at that level to teach them you have the power of choice, but you also need to understand that with your choices, as minor as it may be, there are some consequences? What are your thoughts? I'm not getting your audio again. Roland, it seems like we've lost your audio again. I'm going to give you a couple seconds to try to work that out. Shem, one of the things I wanted to get back to you on is older persons like to say, young people idle and they always getting involved in disgusting things, and young people always, getting into trouble. And I understand that you are the president of the Students' Council at the Allen School. I also understand that you were head boy at the Allen School. And from your personal experience, being at the Allen School, what are some of the projects, programs, interventions that you see there at your school that you find useful for helping young persons to stay on the right track, and possibly that could help assist other young persons across Barbados?
Yes, please. I'm happy that you asked that question. In the beginning of the 2021 to 2022 academic year, the Students' Council of the Allen School decided that we must make students feel like if they can be developed on the online environment. And so one of the first programs we have started was by the name of the Allen School Online Care Space, where that students can come to share their concerns, and they can come and share their ideas to the Students' Council so that we can implement them to help them develop even on the online environment, because the reality is that we didn't know when we were going to come back online, and so we needed to make those first formers up to sixth formers feel as comfortable as possible. The next program we implemented was the peer tutoring program, where that if there are any students that are having any difficulties with some of the basic subjects like mathematics, English literature, English language, that we will help them. So members of the Students' Council and some of the prefect corps at the Allen School came on board to help those students, and we have been receiving wonderful results because of that program. And lastly, one of the last programs we've implemented was the Allen School Leadership Certificate Program, where I facilitate that as a president. Because as you spoke before, that the older generation will say that young people always find themselves in idle. However, I believe that there are a lot of leaders, especially our young people. And so I took that initiative to the principal of the Allen School, Miss Julia Beckles, and said to her, "Ma'am, I want to develop, as the school developed me into a leader, I want to develop other leaders." And so that is how the Allen School Leadership Certificate Program came up. And so that is how we want to, as I told people before, I am a go-getter of student development. I'm an ambassador for student development, and that is where I found myself, and that is those programs that I help students at the Allen School with.
Okay, brilliant. And I do think that we can take some of that across our other schools, leadership development programs, getting persons interested and invested. But Shernell, I want to make this point, because it's all well and fine for me to talk about programs that are available at school. But more often than not, the persons who sign up for those programs are persons who we probably don't need to be that worried about. They're interested, they're engaged, that's where they already were heading. They want to be leaders, that's why they signed up. One of the things I found, and I saw it recently with the Faith Marshall Harris Sandy Lane Charitable Trust, they were working on a summer camp program to assist some students at some of our secondary schools to make sure they understand, certain life skills, how to develop yourself, how to get into barbering, how to present yourself for an interview. That's useful. But Shernell, tell me, what do you think? How do we get to those young persons who have no interest whatsoever in a meeting, a program, a training, anything, no interest whatsoever? How do we connect with those young persons to help them to get back or to put them on the right track?
I think we have to seek them out. You have to go where they are, and you have to seek them out. Don't just throw the idea and say, well, here it is. You know what you will expect to get. Like you said, the usual ones who will want to be a part of a club. But when I first went to Darrell Jordan Secondary in 2019, I wanted to start an etiquette club. Basically, and I wanted to get those girls, not necessarily troublemakers, but girls that people would not necessarily would not necessarily think would be a part of a club like that. So I asked some teachers who would have been there before, obviously, to point me to some girls who they think could benefit from this program, and it was aimed at getting them to teaching them skills on etiquette, how to handle themselves if they go for a job interview, how to beautify themselves, how to speak standard English, how to speak properly, how to, different things that normally they would not be shown. And if we could get to the point where we don't just sit down and sit back and watch them self-destruct, but really to seek them out and go where they are, talk with them on a real, and hear them out. And many times these children want to be heard. They want that somebody is listening to them, not just hearing them to retort, but somebody's listening, and in listening to them, that they're offering something that could better them. Because many times it is a case that they feel like nobody cares. Okay, so they would need we would need to seek them out, to understand where they're coming from, ask them for their ideas as to what they would like to see happen, what kind of club they would like to see come about, what things they would like to be involved in. You might be surprised at the ideas that these young people come up with. Because we brush them off, it doesn't mean that they don't have a contribution to make. But I think in going to them and listening, and actually hearing what it is that they have to say, I think that they would come around to the idea of being a part of a club or a community that would include them as
Yeah.
well. And in so doing, we talk about the hidden curriculum. Even in your classrooms as teachers, the hidden curriculum are those things that are not necessarily on the syllabus to teach, but those things that the children will learn and discuss. By the way, in the classroom, you're discussing math in the classroom. Consumer arithmetic can take them so far. How do I spend my money when I go to the supermarket, and so on, So we have to seek them out and not just
Understood.
throw the idea out there and hope that they come.
Thank you. Seek them out. I love that message. Short and succinct, seek them out. And I think it's important for me to highlight as well that there are some programs that, have been implemented at the national level. I know that the Ministry of Youth has a program in terms of helping young persons to develop skills, hone those skills, and then be able to use that to create their own businesses. And so entrepreneurship is a very important way for young persons to find ways to use their skills. Maybe we can get into a quick conversation at some point in this discussion about how our education system supports or dissuades young people from getting involved in useful activities. But one of the concerns that persons share all the time is the lack of mental support for our young people at the primary level and the lack of enough support at the secondary level. So Shernell, for example, I know for a fact that there's one guidance counselor, possibly one guidance counselor to 600 plus students within a given secondary school, sometimes 800 students. At the primary level, we don't even have that dedicated support. Roland, I'm going to come to you again. I'm going to ask you to share with me, what do you think that support could do or help to change at that primary level for our children and young persons across Barbados? How do you think that support at that stage could take us into a better place in a couple of years?
Good evening, panel again. I really believe that is a very good initiative. The Ministry of Technical Education and Training, in collaboration with the San Juan National Trust, they actually have the primary school counseling program. And before the children actually went back into school, we embarked on an initiative to give the young people something called psychological first aid, which was basically aimed at seeing where they're at, how they feel about returning back to school, and actually preparing them mentally back for in-person learning in light of the whole COVID-19 situation. The whole COVID-19 situation presented a number of challenges, but it created some challenge financially for some of the parents. And once the parents were focusing on the well-being of their children in terms of food and shelter, it was a very, very stressful time for the parents and the children. So what we found that a lot of parents some of the parents didn't really addressing their emotional well-being, and also the children also were lacking that emotional support. So the psychological first aid, we actually use that to help the young people to prepare themselves better for their in-person learning.
Psychological first aid, that's very interesting. And I love that you roped in that point that parents who haven't dealt with their emotional issues or sometimes their mental issues are not able to support their children adequately. How do you think the parents teachers associations, for example, would be able to pull them together or meet as a community and help each other?
That's very, very interesting resource that you just mentioned. Up front, I would reach out all the parent teachers associations around the island to actually get together and come and work with their respective principals, and to bring people actually in clinicians like all the experts that we have here in the panel to address the emotional needs of the primary school children and the secondary level also, because they need to be taught, parents and the students need to be taught skills such as using positive self-talk. As individuals, we all have an inner thought going on in our head, and if that thought is one that is negative, that would damage someone else or ourselves, it's really good to use some positive self-talk to actually replace those negative thoughts. And also having the children to learn how to be a good listener. We all know that we're saying that we have 2 ears and 1 mouth, so it's better to listen as much as possible so that we can make better informed choices when we understand what is going on. We believe that the Parent Teachers Association should bring in some clinicians to assist the parents and the students in how to deal with their emotional well-being.
Thank you. And I think that's important too. When we talk about children and helping to develop our young persons, we necessarily need to train our parents. I know the Barbados Family Planning Association does have some parent training programs. And I think we need to take that to a wider level to ensure that across the island, and probably for all our new parents, they have some experience, some amount of training, some amount of exposure to tips and tricks on how to deal with or how to help raise their children and teach them positive critical thinking skills or conflict resolution skills. So we are going to head to a quick break in a bit. I want to continue to encourage you to share your comments with us, share your thoughts with us on our social media pages. So you can check us out at the Division of Youth Affairs on Facebook, or you can check us out at CBC on Facebook Live. Share your comments. That's where you'll get the opportunity to win that prize at Amigos, and we'll be back in a bit to continue the discussion.
Young people cannot continue to sit back and watch our peers use the gun as the preferred weapon of choice. There comes a time when silence is betrayal, and that time is now. We need to implement more cultural and sports programs as a mechanism to help curb the violence we are seeing today. Serious social developmental programs needs to be implemented at the community level for our young people.
Brilliant. Thank you, Ashley, for that intervention. And one of the points there that was raised is the usefulness, or maybe the possible technique we could use is having sports as a diversion tactic for young persons. And I know that's one of the mandates of the Ministry of Sports, Youth and Community Empowerment, trying to get young persons engaged in positive, useful activities to steer them down a better track. I want to go down to what I consider to be somewhat controversial topic or area. One of the ways in which we try to reframe or train our children into better, appropriate, upstanding behavior is we try to discipline them. You know, at home, we tell them this is right, this is wrong, and there are ways that we can communicate that message. Traditionally, the most immediate way we communicate that message is through corporal punishment. In some instances, it's reinstated and replicated within our schools. So we have the senior teachers, possibly the headmaster or headmistress, who in certain situations administers corporal punishment. In a space of 2022, where we've signed on to the Convention of the Rights of the Child, it speaks out against corporal punishment. That is one of the things we're looking at in terms of protecting the rights of children. How do we then treat to training our children? How do we discipline our children? How do we teach them what is right from what is wrong? And do we necessarily need to get rid of corporal punishment or find different ways? Shawn, I know that this is some of the areas that you share some thoughts and comments on. I've seen some media articles on it. I want to hear your views. What are your thoughts about corporal punishment as a way of disciplining or training children, especially if we're trying to get them away from violence?
I think that's a scare tactic that will only work when inflicted. I think what we need to do is to teach our young people and our children the skills that even when they are not in our presence, that they know what they should do. My son usually would say to me, Daddy, I was about to make a decision today that was not an appropriate decision, but I saw you standing in front of me and it was not there. So I think instead of using corporal punishment, we need to set the example. We need to lead from the front. We need to be able to talk with our children. And this is a conversation that must start from the time the child is very, very, very young. Giving that child the opportunity to be able to come to you and to say, that, Daddy, I have a problem I want to discuss with you. Mommy, I have a problem that I want to discuss with you. I want you to listen to what I have to say. And as the parent, you sit and you listen to that child. You know, we have a situation in Barbados where some parents will say to their children, come and talk to me about anything. And as soon as the child goes to speak to the parent, that's what you really come to talk to me about. I don't want to hear that. And the conversation is ended. So I think instead of corporal punishment, we need to start that conversation. We need to be able to talk to our children. We need to be able to allow our children to know how to make the choices, how to make appropriate decisions, how to do things that will profit them, not only in the presence of the parent, but in the absence of the parent as well.
Thank you, Shawn. And I want to come to you, Shernell. I think that you would know, or you would be able to appreciate in a different way immediately what value, or if any, there might be to corporal punishment within the schools. Do you think, or have you seen any benefit within your experience between the administration of corporal punishment for deviant behavior of children at school, or has there been any impact on their mental health, for example, through that process?
There is a place for corporal punishment, but as Shawn said, you have to empower the young people in their decision-making skills. You're not going to always be there. As a parent myself, I have to teach my son that he has to make choices, and I have to teach him how to make proper choices or the right choices. But in cases where I don't think that corporal punishment should be taken off the books entirely, but there must be other ways in which we can use to positive reinforcement for our children. Necessarily, it doesn't have to come down to lashes all the time, but because lashes might work for some, and I've seen it, but lashes did not work for others. So we have to figure out, what are the alternatives to corporal punishment, rather than it being the first method used for punishment. We have to figure out the other ways in which we can teach our children that what they have done is wrong and there are consequences. Shawn rightly said we have to teach it from the very, very young. We do not excuse when a child does something that is wrong. We do not laugh it off and excuse it. Oh, he's just a little child. No, you have to make the child understand, if you do this, there's a consequence to it, rather than just laughing it off, and then the child doesn't know any different, and then they go on to make that same bad decision or wrong choice in a public forum, and the parent wants to, as Bayesians would say, kill the child because they've done something that is embarrassing to them. But you have to start from home to teach the child there are certain things that are not acceptable and there are consequences when you do something that is incorrect. But in schools and in homes, I don't think corporal punishment should be taken entirely off the books, but there are different ways that you will address certain situations, because not everybody, it will not work for everybody.
Thanks, Shernell. And just in the spirit of giving parents information and helping them to understand better, what they can or can't do, especially to divert children from violence, just provide for us some examples of, alternative ways that parents can share positive reinforcement or reinforce positive behaviors among their children.
Okay, I know that children generally, one particular example, children generally like to have their devices. And if you take that device away, sometimes that hurts more than lashing the child. If you if you're supposed to, they wanted to go somewhere, and I know it was done in a different way when older persons were growing up. The parents will wait till they get dressed and then tell them they're not going anywhere. But that, you don't have to do that to the child. But we know for a fact that sometimes when children want to do something, and they did not follow through on maybe something you told them to do before, that's a way of basically showing them that there are consequences to their actions. They did not do what they're supposed to do, so this is going to happen, or you won't get this, or you won't get that. That's one way. I know what works for my son is sitting him down and talking. That works. And for some children, just the fact that your parent is going to talk, that is enough punishment, because they don't want to hear, oh, why did you do this? Tell me why you did that. Sometimes children just, children will respond to different things differently. So those are some examples that you can use, that you can do as a parent. Maybe withholding something that you know definitely that they like to do. Grounding in Barbados works, believe it or not. Some
Yeah.
children like to go outside and play. You tell
Yeah.
them, no, you cannot go outside and play. That's for not washing dishes, or that's for beating fighting with your sister or your brother. So there are different ways that we can use, and not necessarily shouting at the children, because they don't hear well in shouting sometimes.
That's interesting. Thank you very much, Shernell, for that feedback, and thank you for the alternative options to corporal punishment that parents should use, rather. Shem, what are your thoughts? Corporal punishment, is it useful? I mean, was it any help? Did it change anything for you? Lashes just burn and cool off. What is the value, if any at all, of corporal punishment, or do you think we need to find alternative ways entirely to deal with the training of our children?
Well, I would say I don't know where. I always ask myself the question: where would I be if my mother didn't give me lashes
Oh.
or anything of the sort? But I believe that first of all you have to look at where the behavior comes from, and most of that again comes from the environment. And I think that if a parent can sit down with a child and say, well, Shem or whoever the child is, I did the same thing. I went through the same thing. Yes, you might see me do this, or you would have seen me do that, but this is not necessarily correct. It starts with the conversation, all right? And other than that, I think that we might have some children that might not respond to the corporal punishment as others.
Yeah.
But I think that in Barbados, what we should do is continue to implement programs for those children who might see it, who might have, I don't want to say a behavioral problem, but those that will like to rebel, or those that like to rebel, etc. For example, and not only to rebel, but still to develop them. All right. For example, years ago, when I came home with a terrible report, my mother didn't say that she's going to beat me. However, there was the program with the Fire Service, the Fire Cadet program hosted by the Barbados Fire Service. And going into that program, I was taught the responsibility of education and the importance of education, and why I should take education seriously. So there are many other ways of having to punish or discipline children.
Yes.
I don't agree that it should be taken out fully, but I think that programs should be implemented for those that might want to rebel or might have, temper problems, etc.
Understood.
That is my,
Understood. Thank you very much. We're going to head to a quick break, and then we'll continue this conversation. We're heading down a very interesting road, and I want to keep you there for a bit, but we're going to head to our break first.
Gun violence is very bad, not only for the people involved, but also for their families. It has a trickle-down effect. We need to think twice before we do. It will affect their mother, their father, their brother, their sister. They might have a daughter and a son. So we need to think before we act. We need more love and peace in our society.
Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. We're continuing our conversation on the Listen Up Accord of Choices. And again, this is a collaboration between the Ministry of Youth, Sports and Community Empowerment and the Caribbean Broadcasting Corporation. And just before we went to break, we were having a very interesting conversation about corporal punishment. We got some mixed views about, we should probably enforce positive reinforcement, try not to go down the corporal punishment line. It's not that effective. It's a scare tactic, and instead we should talk to our children a bit more. But then on the flip side, we have perspectives saying, there's a time and place for corporal punishment, and we don't need to get rid of it altogether. My next point I want to put to the panelists today is for us to think about what messages can we send then at the primary level? What is appropriate then at the primary level for our children? If we're thinking about you make a choice and there is a consequence, what message is that then teaching to our primary school children in terms of corporal punishment? You make a choice, you get a lash, it inflicts pain. What message are we sending there? Roland, I want to come to you, seeing again in your capacity as consultant with primary schools, as a counselor. What are your thoughts around that space, corporal punishment at that very tender age or tender level? Are we actually teaching appropriate lessons to our children by using that medium?
But that corporal punishment is definitely a hot button topic in our Barbados. So a lot of successful people have had corporal punishment, and then we have on the other side some people not so successful and found themselves in difficult situations have also been challenged with the corporal punishment. What I would say at the primary school level is for us as individuals, especially parents, to understand that our children are like sponges. They're taking a lot at that age. So at that level, we really want to stress the importance for the parents to get more knowledgeable, because we are a progressive society. We know that most children demonstrate understanding of right or wrong from an early age. As language develop, they kind of have a clear understanding of why certain behaviors may not be desirable. And at that young age, we as adults, we know that there is the propensity for our children to make poor decisions. For example, the parent may tell their child not to go outside at a particular time, or not to go on the school tablet to play games and have that long discussion with the child. However, at that tender age, the child may if the consequence is not reinforced immediately, such as corporal punishment, the child will not follow those directions. And so what we have now is that the parent should teach the child the difference between having the consequence being immediate. So if they do implement corporal punishment, they have to explain to the child why they are getting the lashes at that particular time, and also incorporate different methods I've mentioned differently with the guidance counselor on how they could give the child some consequences, such as time out and stuff like that.
Yeah. Thank you, Shernell. I see you nodding along. I see you saying, yes, preach, hallelujah, church is in session. I want to find out from you, in terms of, Roland has already painted the picture for us. The child has done something, immediately you administer a lash, a little flick, something like that, and then you move into the space of explaining to them what they've done and why they've done it wrong. Some persons still have some difficulties with that, and they'll tell you about the research that has been done that shows that the mental stresses and the mental effect of corporal punishment is long term. But we also have a situation where there may be, and forgive me for saying this, an appropriate way and inappropriate way to go about corporal punishment. Where is that line between corporal punishment and abuse? How do we move from teaching our children a lesson into possibly abusing them? And then again, how could that lead into a space where young people become rebellious and violent? My entire life I've grown up understanding if I do something, the consequence is pain. So if somebody does me something, the consequence is pain. how do we make sure we can make a difference between corporal punishment and abuse, if there's a difference, if there is a line, and how can we get that person or that young person to understand that that's not how you're supposed to treat to others in terms of something happens to me and I must inflict pain. Let's go.
All right, so as I said before, different people will react to different types of punishment differently, because somebody getting lashes, that might not do them anything, or eventually they get so immune to it that a lash is not going to do a thing to that person, you know. So we have to figure out what works for, well, each parent has to figure out what works for their children. And I want to say that you can have siblings, children from the same parents, but these children are all different. And what will work for Shernell may not work for Keisha. What might work for Keisha may not work for Ryan, you know. So we have to figure out, or as parents, be observant and know what works for our children. And bordering on, you asked about what's the line between abuse and when it is just simple getting punished by lashes. When it goes as far as to maim or to hurt or, you know, cause serious pain to the child in terms of cutting their skin or anything like that, then we know that that borders on abuse. Because you can lash a child, but you don't have to lash them so hard that it breaks some part of them or it cuts some part of them. Some people will use a belt buckle to hit a child with, and that, to me, that is extreme. That is abusive. Some people will slap the child in the face with rings on their hands, leaving a mark. And I mean, you come across children that say they got hit in their face so hard that they couldn't see for a while.
Yeah,
that is abusive, you know. So it doesn't have to be that far. It doesn't have to be that hard. But I think that lashes still have a place in as an option to punishment.
We hear you loud and clear.
I had a principal that used to explain before he he lashed the children. He would explain what they did wrong and why they're getting lashes. And there's nothing wrong with it.
I hear you loud and clear, Shernell. We tell them the lesson first, and then we make sure they understand the consequences. We're going to take a quick cut for a video message, and then we'll come back to our conversation.
Motorsport is my passion, and I love what I do. I know you guys must love something too. Choose wisely, live smartly, dedicate yourselves to your passions, and let's try to end all types of violence in our country.
Thank you very much, Zane, for that intervention, and a brilliant young man in Barbados. And again, it goes to show that young people are getting involved in positive behaviors and activities. And one of the positive things that are in place currently for young persons is the Get Hired program. So the Ministry of Youth, Sports and Community Empowerment has a Get Hired program that will be expanded in the near future with hopes of providing more job opportunities for young people in Barbados. Now, this announcement was made from the Ministry of Youth, Sport and Community Empowerment, the Minister rather, Charles Griffith, as he addressed participants at the opening ceremony of the Diverse Get Hired Employability Initiative. So we're going to show a short clip of the Minister and get back to this discussion.
My peers would have mentioned the fact that we need to expand this program, and we do. At this stage, we're training, I think I saw a number of 170 persons. We need to expand that. And we will see how best we can have satellite locations across the country. As long as we can find those facilitators who will come in and do the job that we require them to do, then we will expand this program. We have community centers within the country that, in my opinion, we need to fully utilize. So we will find the necessary locations, the necessary satellite locations to expand this program. Because, like I mentioned earlier, we see you as our human currency. We must invest, and we need to ensure that at the end of the day, that when we go to that bank of youth inside of this country, that we're getting absolute value in terms of what you can achieve.
Those government interventions in supporting young persons to get involved in positive behaviors and activities, and really thankful for the Get Hired program. So as we prepare to wrap up this evening's session, I'm going to spin back to my panelists again. And as we wrap up, I want to hear from you. What are some positive activities, programs that young persons can get involved in that you have found to be useful? Very quickly from each of you. We're going to go around. We're going to start with you, Shawn.
Well, Supreme Counseling for Personal Development, we offer programs for young people. We teach young people about building their self-esteem. We teach them about conflict resolution, anger management, and so on. But I want to say here that parents need to catch young people in the act of doing something good. And that is an activity within itself. Catching a young person with, you come home and the house is clean. And the first thing you're going to say as a parent, what you want or what you do wrong today? In opposed to, thank you, you did a fantastic job. Well, I'm so proud of you. So that in itself here is an activity that you can involve young people in. We need to get back to the community centers, as the minister rightfully said. Open the community centers. Get our youth organizations going again. Get our sporting clubs going again. If you want to say to young people you have to make a choice between violence and something, then what is that something? We have to put that something in place so that the young persons will have that positive alternative to be involved in.
All right, Shem, we're going to come to you now. What are some positive, very quickly, some positive things young people can get involved in?
Yes, please. Well, in terms of youth and in terms of students, I will speak in terms of students. As I am a student, I would encourage them to get into the positive activities such as students' councils at your schools, any extracurricular activities that are happening inside of your schools. Get into them, even outside. Develop yourself, develop your skills, your talents in sports, in anything, whatever you need to do to develop yourself. I would encourage them to do that. I would encourage students to do that.
Brilliant. Roland, some positive things, even for parents, that we can help young persons to steer off this possible deviant or wayward path.
That's a great question. So if you're actually genuinely empowering our young people, if you're genuinely empowering our young people, it's time we offer them what we call a freedom of choice. And what do I mean? It's asking the young person exactly what they want to do with their lives and subsequently helping them to achieve it. So we have to actually create these situations where they can actually go after what they want. We mentioned earlier about sports. Sports is a great thing to get young people involving, but we get to move them away from the online environment and get them in activities that can promote their physical health and indeed invariably their mental health.
Thank you.
Sports programs and activities is a really good thing to get involved in.
Thank you very much to our panelists, and thank you for joining us for our final episode of Listen Up Accord. We look forward to seeing you sometime soon to continue our conversations about youth and development in Barbados. This was brought to you in collaboration with the Ministry of Youth, Sports and Community Empowerment and the Caribbean Broadcasting Corporation. Do have a good evening.